Claudia Goretti knew every face in the Street Benedict's homeless shelter by heart, every weathered smile, every averted gaze. She'd been coming here for 6 Christmases with her son Sergio, watching him light up as he handed out toys with his small, earnest hands. But today, December 23rd, there was a new face. A man sitting alone in the corner, head down, hood pulled low. Something about the slope of his shoulders made her chest tighten with inexplicable dread. When he looked up, just for a second, her blood turned to ice. Those eyes, dark brown with that distinctive gold fleck in the left iris. Elio, her ex-husband, the man she'd fled from 6 years ago when she discovered documents linking him to organized crime. The man she believed orchestrated terrible things behind his charming smile. The man whose world she'd escaped while carrying their child, swearing Sergio would never know his father's darkness. And now he was here, in the one place she'd always felt safe, watching her with those same haunting eyes. The ugly Christmas sweater itched against Claudia's neck as she pushed through the double doors of Street Benedict's homeless shelter, Sergio's small hand wrapped tightly in hers. The familiar smells enveloped her industrial cleaner, fighting a losing battle against the scent of too many bodies in too small a space, undercut by cinnamon from donated pastries and the pine of a slightly lopsided Christmas tree in the corner. "Mama," Sergio tugged at her sleeve, his voice soft and deliberate, the way it always was when he was carefully forming words. "Toys now?" She looked down at her son, this beautiful 6-year-old boy with his father's dark eyes and her stubborn chin, and felt the familiar swell of fierce love mixed with protective fear. "Yes, baby. We'll give out the toys like we always do." Sergio's face transformed into that radiant smile that made every sacrifice worth it. Every sleepless night studying for the bar exam while 9 months pregnant, every double shift at the paralegal office before she made partner at Castellano and Associates, every moment she'd raised him completely alone, building their life from nothing but determination and love. This tradition had started small, born from Sergio's pure-hearted impulse to give away his favorite toy truck to a homeless man they'd passed on the street when he was barely 3. Most children that age clutched their belongings tighter. Sergio had pressed his treasure into a stranger's weathered hands and smiled. That moment had cracked something open in Claudia's chest. This child, her miracle, teaching her about generosity when she'd been so focused on survival. "Claudia, and my favorite young man." Father Thomas Bennett approached them, his weathered face creasing into familiar warmth. The elderly priest had run Street Benedict's for 23 years, and his genuine kindness was the reason Claudia had chosen this shelter over the dozens of others in Brooklyn. "We've been waiting for you too. Half the residents have been asking when Sergio would arrive. We brought books this year too," Claudia said, adjusting the heavy bags hanging from her shoulder. Sergio insisted people needed stories. "Books," Sergio repeated, nodding enthusiastically. His speech came slower than other children his age, each word requiring focus and effort, but his meaning was always achingly clear. "People. Read. Happy. That they do, son. That they do." Father Bennett's eyes held that gentle understanding he always showed Sergio. Never pity, never impatience, just acceptance. "We've got some new residents this week. Been a brutal December. Temperature dropped to 15 degrees last night." Something in his tone made Claudia glance up sharply. "New residents?" "A few. City shelters are overflowing. We took in everyone we could." Father Bennett's expression flickered with something she couldn't quite read. Concern? Unease? "There's a man in the back corner. Keeps to himself mostly. Calls himself Mr. Ellis, quiet type." The name meant nothing to her, but that prickle of awareness she'd learned to trust as a lawyer, the instinct that told her when a witness was hiding something, or when a case had invisible complications, raised the hairs on the back of her neck. Claudia began setting up at their usual table near the serving line, letting Sergio carefully arrange the donated items with the precision he brought to everything. She'd learned early that routine soothed him, that predictability was a gift in his world, where social cues felt like a foreign language and unexpected changes could trigger overwhelming anxiety. Books in one stack, sorted by size, toys in another, organized by color. Warm socks, Sergio's personal edition this year, folded in neat pairs. But today, despite the familiar ritual, Claudia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her gaze swept the shelter's main room. The usual faces smiled and waved. Patricia with her 3 children, always grateful. Old Samuel, who told elaborate stories about his merchant marine days. Young Jesse, who was studying for his GED. All familiar, all safe. except for the figure in the far corner. He sat alone at a table meant for four, hood pulled low despite the shelter's warmth, shoulders hunched inward like he was trying to disappear into himself. A cup of coffee sat untouched before him, steam no longer rising. Everything about his posture screamed isolation, deliberate invisibility. Claudia's legal mind cataloged details automatically. Approximately 6 feet tall. Lean build, too lean, actually. Like he'd lost significant weight recently. Clothes worn but clean. Hands wrapped around that coffee cup showed long fingers, no visible scars or tattoos. Left hand, no wedding ring, but a pale band of skin where one had been. She forced herself to look away, to focus on Sergio, who was happily explaining to an elderly woman named Dorothy about the picture book he'd chosen, especially for her something about a garden and friendship. But her eyes kept drifting back to that corner table. There was something about the slope of those shoulders, something familiar in the way he held himself, even in defeat, something that made her chest tighten with inexplicable dread. "Don't be ridiculous," she told herself firmly. "You're seeing ghosts. It's been 6 years. He could be anywhere, probably is anywhere but here." "Mama," Sergio's excited voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Man needs toy." Before she could react, before she could process what was happening, Sergio had darted away from the table with that singular focus he sometimes developed, heading straight toward, "No, no, no, no. Sergio, stop!" She lunged forward, but he was already there, standing in front of the hooded stranger, holding out a small red toy car with earnest determination. "You," Sergio said simply, pressing the car toward the man's chest with both hands. "For you." The stranger's head snapped up, time fractured into 1,000 crystalline pieces. Those eyes, dark brown, almost black, with that distinctive gold fleck in the left iris that caught the light. Eyes she'd stared into on their wedding day in that tiny courthouse ceremony. Eyes that had watched her sleep, had filled with tears when she told him she was pregnant, had haunted her dreams for 6 years. Elio Lopez, her ex-husband, the man she'd discovered was connected to organized crime, the man she'd fled from in the middle of the night, 6 months pregnant and terrified, the man she'd believed was capable of terrible things. Here, in Street Benedict's homeless shelter, looking gaunt and haunted and impossibly, undeniably real. Their eyes locked across 5 feet of distance that felt like an infinite chasm. She saw shock flash across his face. Those sharp features she remembered, now harder, thinner, marked by exhaustion and something that looked like grief. His beard was scraggly and unkempt, so different from the immaculately groomed man she'd known. But those eyes, God, those eyes hadn't changed. Recognition, pain, fear, and something else, something that made her throat close up and her heart hammer against her ribs. Wonder. He was looking at Sergio with absolute, unguarded wonder. "For me?" Elio's voice was rougher than she remembered, gravelly with disuse or emotion, but still unmistakably his. Sergio nodded enthusiastically, pushing the car more insistently into Elio's hands. "Broken. You. Fix." Elio's hands trembled. She noticed the way they shook slightly as he accepted the toy car and turned it over with careful reverence. Those hands that used to hold hers. Those hands she'd once trusted completely before discovering what she believed they'd been involved in. "The wheel's loose," Elio murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced up at Sergio, and his expression transformed into something that physically hurt Claudia to witness. Tenderness. Absolute, devastating tenderness. I could fix it for you. If you'd like." "Yes." Sergio's whole face lit up with that unbridled joy he showed so rarely, usually reserved for his favorite puzzles or the moments when words came easily. Claudia was moving now, her body finally catching up to her brain's screaming warnings. Every maternal instinct, every protective barrier she'd built around her son, around their life, was shrieking at her to get Sergio away from this man. This dangerous man. This man whose office she'd searched 6 years ago, finding documents with names she recognized from news reports, men connected to disappearances, to violence, to a world she wanted no part of. "Sergio, come here. Now." Her voice came out harder than she intended, sharp with barely controlled panic. Sergio's face fell, confusion clouding his features, but before he could respond, Elio was standing. The movement was careful, non-threatening, but Claudia still took an instinctive step back, positioning herself between her son and this ghost from her past. Elio pulled something from his pocket, a small, battered multi-tool that looked like it had seen years of use. His hands moved with practiced precision, selecting the tiny screwdriver attachment, making a quick adjustment to the toy car's loose wheel. Within seconds, he handed it back to Sergio, wheel repaired and spinning smoothly. "There," Elio said softly, still not looking directly at Claudia, though she could feel the weight of his awareness like a physical touch. "Good as new." "Thank you." Sergio examined the car with delight, rolling it between his palms to test the wheel, then looked up at Elio with that open, trusting expression that he rarely gave anyone outside their tiny circle of safety. His face radiated pure gratitude. You nice, you good." Those two words, "you good," landed like a bomb in Claudia's chest. Sergio had a gift, something she'd learned to trust even when it defied logic. He read people not through words or social performance, but through some deeper intuition. He'd screamed and hidden from her colleague Richard, who'd later been arrested for embezzlement. He'd immediately loved her neighbor Mrs. Chen, who'd become like a grandmother to him. Sergio's instincts were rarely wrong, and he thought Elio was good. "Sergio, now." Claudia's hand was on her son's shoulder, firm but not rough, pulling him back, putting her body between him and Elio like a shield. Elio finally looked at her fully, and the impact of his direct gaze nearly stole her breath. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, bruise purple and deep, saw the way his clothes hung on a frame that had lost 30 pounds at least, saw exhaustion etched into every line of his face, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from months or years of grinding survival. This wasn't the man she'd left. This was someone who'd been hollowed out and rebuilt from suffering. Claudia. Her name on his lips felt like a wound reopening, like every conversation they'd never had, every explanation she'd refused to hear, every moment of the last 6 years compressed into 3 syllables. "Don't." Her voice shook despite her effort to control it. "Don't say my name. Don't talk to him. Don't." "Is he?" Elio started, his eyes dropping to Sergio, and she watched him doing the math in real time. 6 years since she'd left, Sergio clearly 6 years old. Those unmistakable features, the dark eyes, the specific way his eyebrows drew together when he concentrated, the cowlick in his hair that never laid flat. The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but deafening. Claudia grabbed Sergio's hand and turned, heart hammering so violently she thought it might crack her ribs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process this impossible collision of her carefully separated worlds. "Claudia, please." Elio's voice behind her, broken and desperate. "It's not what you think. I can explain everything. Please, just let me." She didn't stop, didn't turn around, couldn't afford to, because if she looked at him again, if she saw that desperate hope in his eyes, she might shatter completely. But Sergio, her beautiful, intuitive son, looked back over his shoulder as they reached the shelter doors, and waved. The gesture was small, innocent, his fingers wiggling in that childish goodbye that pierced straight through Claudia's defenses. Through the corner of her eye, she saw Elio raise his hand in return, saw him press his other hand to his mouth like he was physically holding back words or sobs or both. The December cold hit her face as they stepped outside, but Claudia barely felt it through the ice already flooding her veins. 6 years. She'd built a whole life in 6 years. A career, a home, a safe world for her son. She'd moved on, or told herself she had. She'd convinced herself that leaving Elio was the right choice, the only choice, the choice that protected Sergio from a father involved in darkness she couldn't comprehend. But Sergio had looked at Elio and seen goodness, and Elio had looked at Sergio like he was witnessing a miracle. Claudia's phone buzzed in her pocket as she buckled Sergio into his car seat. A text from an unknown number. Her hands shook as she opened it. Just 3 words. "Please, let me explain." She stared at the message, then at the shelter's entrance, where the man she'd once loved still loved, if she was brutally honest with herself, sat among strangers, looking like he'd lost everything. The man she'd run from. The man whose son had just waved goodbye. The man who might not be the monster she'd believed him to be. Claudia deleted the message, started the car, and drove away. But she knew, with a certainty that filled her with equal parts terror and something that felt dangerously like hope, that this wasn't over. Not even close. Where are you listening from? Please comment below, and in the seasonal spirit, kindly subscribe now, as we unravel how a mother's fierce love collides with impossible choices. Thank you. 3 days felt like 3 years. Claudia threw herself into work with manic intensity, taking on 2 new cases she didn't have time for, staying at the office until Sergio's bedtime, then later. Anything to avoid the silence of their apartment where her thoughts spiraled into dangerous territory. Anything to stop replaying that moment when Elio's eyes had met hers across the shelter, filled with something that looked terrifyingly like hope. But Sergio wouldn't let her forget. "Nice man," he said on Christmas Eve, unprompted, while they decorated cookies. His small hands carefully pressed red and green sprinkles into frosting. "Nice man, toys. That's right, baby. We gave toys to nice people." Claudia forced brightness into her voice, praying he'd move on to another topic. He didn't. "Nice man," Sergio repeated on Christmas morning, surrounded by the presents she'd saved for months to buy. He held up each gift, a puzzle, new books, building blocks, and his face would light up briefly before clouding over. "Nice man. Where?" "Sergio, look at your new puzzle. It has trains." Desperation made her voice too loud, too cheerful. He looked at the puzzle box, then at her, his dark eyes Elio's eyes. God, how had she never fully acknowledged how much of Elio lived in their son's face, filled with confusion. "Nice man," he said again, softer this time, almost a question. By December 26th, Claudia was exhausted from the effort of redirecting every conversation, distracting him from thoughts of the stranger who'd fixed his toy car with such gentle precision. She'd almost convinced herself they could return to normal, that Sergio's fixation would fade like his other brief obsessions. Then the music box broke. Not the toy car that still worked perfectly, Sergio having tested it approximately 700 times. No, it was the small wooden music box apparatus Elio had given him. Sergio had been carrying it everywhere since that encounter, winding the tiny key to hear the delicate melody that played when the lid opened. Claudia hadn't even noticed Elio slipping it into Sergio's coat pocket until they got home. The thing had probably cost $2 at a thrift store, simple pine wood with a faded ballerina that spun when the music played. But Sergio treasured it like gold, sleeping with it on his nightstand, the tinkling lullaby soothing him through the night, until the mechanism jammed. Sergio wound the key. Nothing. He wound it again, harder. Still nothing. His face crumpled. "Mama, fix." He brought it to her. Trust absolute in his expression. Claudia examined the apparatus, her lawyer's mind utterly useless against the mysteries of tiny mechanical gears. "Baby, I don't know how to fix." More insistent now, anxiety creeping into his voice. She tried everything. She pried gently at the base, wound and unwound the key, even looked up YouTube videos on vintage music box repair at midnight, while Sergio paced his room, unable to sleep without his lullaby. Nothing worked. By morning, Sergio was inconsolable, not crying, which might have been easier to handle, but locked into that rigid distress that came when his carefully ordered world tilted wrong. He sat on the floor of his bedroom, rocking slightly, the broken music box clutched in both hands, repeating the same 3 words over and over. "Fix, man, fix, fix, man, fix. Sergio, sweetheart, we can get you a new one. We'll go to the store right now and fix, man, fix." His voice rose, took on that edge that meant he was approaching a meltdown, rare for him but devastating when it happened. Claudia knelt beside him, her heart fracturing. She'd learned to read his patterns, understand his needs even when words failed him. And right now, he needed something she couldn't give him. No, not something. Someone. "The nice man can fix it," she said quietly, testing the words. "Is that what you're trying to tell me?" Sergio's rocking stopped. He looked at her with those impossibly earnest eyes and nodded. "Man, fix, please." Every instinct screamed at her not to do this. Not to walk back into that shelter, back into Elio's orbit, back into a past she'd worked so hard to escape. She'd built walls for a reason. She'd run for a reason. But her son was suffering. And the only thing that would soothe him was the stranger who might not be a stranger at all. "Okay," Claudia whispered, defeated. "Okay, baby. We'll go see if the nice man can fix it." Sergio's face transformed, sunshine breaking through storm clouds. He stood, grabbed her hand with surprising strength for a 6-year-old, and pulled her toward the door. The drive to Street Benedict's felt like traveling through quicksand, every mile too slow and too fast simultaneously. Claudia's hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white, her mind racing through 1,000 scenarios, none of them ending well. What if Elio was gone? What if he'd been moved, disappeared back into whatever witness protection program or criminal underworld he belonged to. What if he was dangerous, and she was walking her son directly into— "Mama, happy?" Sergio's small voice from the back seat cut through her spiral. She glanced in the rearview mirror. He was smiling, actually smiling, the broken music box cradled carefully in his lap. God help her, she was doing this. Father Bennett looked unsurprised when they walked through the shelter doors. If anything, his weathered face held something like knowing relief. "Claudia, Sergio, welcome back. Is he—" She couldn't finish the question, couldn't say his name aloud. "Mr. Ellis is here. Been asking about you two, actually." Father Bennett's eyes were kind but searching. Ask me every day if the boy with the kind eyes would return. Something in her chest twisted painfully. "We just need a quick word with him. Take your time. He's in his usual spot." Father Bennett paused, then added gently, "He's a good man, Claudia. Whatever brought him here, whatever he's running from, I've been doing this work for 23 years. I know broken people. That man in the corner? He's not broken from doing wrong. He's broken from having wrong done to him." Before Claudia could respond, Sergio had spotted Elio and was moving. Not running exactly, but walking with single-minded purpose toward the figure hunched at the corner table. Same position as 3 days ago, like he'd barely moved. "Sergio, wait." But her son was already there, thrusting the music box into Elio's hands. "Fix, please." Elio looked up, and the naked emotion that crossed his face when he saw Sergio made Claudia's breath catch. Joy and pain mixed so thoroughly she couldn't separate them. "You came back. Broken," Sergio explained seriously, pointing at the music box. "You fix. I'll try my best, buddy." Elio's voice was rough with emotion, but his hands were steady as he accepted the apparatus, turning it over with the same careful reverence he'd shown the toy car. He pulled out that battered multi-tool, selected a tiny flathead screwdriver, and began working on the base with focused precision. Claudia watched those hands she'd held on their wedding day, hands that had touched her with such tenderness, hands she'd believed were stained with criminal deeds. They moved with practiced skill, patient and gentle, completely absorbed in the task of fixing a $2 music box like it was the most important thing in the world. Because to Sergio, it was. And somehow, Elio understood that. "There's a gear mechanism that gets stuck sometimes," Elio murmured, half to Sergio, half to himself. "Just needs a little adjustment and some careful." He made a minute movement with the screwdriver. There, he wound the key. The delicate melody filled the air between them, tinkling and sweet. The faded ballerina spun in slow circles. Sergio's entire face illuminated. "Fixed! You fixed!" "Good as new." Elio handed it back, and Claudia saw his hand tremble slightly when Sergio's small fingers brushed his. "You take good care of it now." "Thank you." Sergio clutched the music box to his chest, then, without warning or hesitation, wrapped his arms around Elio's neck in a fierce hug. Elio froze. His eyes closed. One hand came up slowly, carefully, to rest on Sergio's back, and Claudia saw his whole body shake with the effort of holding back whatever emotion threatened to overwhelm him. "Sergio, honey, let's let Mr. Ellis—" "Can we talk?" The words burst from Elio before she could finish. "Please, Claudia. Just 5 minutes. Let me explain." She should say no. Should grab Sergio and run, maintain the boundaries she'd built for excellent reasons, should protect her son from whatever dangerous complications this man represented. But Sergio was still hugging Elio, peaceful and content in a way that defied logic, and Father Bennett's words echoed in her mind. "He's broken from having wrong done to him." 5 minutes, Claudia said, her voice harder than she felt. "Sergio stays where I can see him." Father Bennett materialized with perfect timing. "Sergio, my friend, would you like to help me sort the new book donations? I could use a young man with excellent organizational skills." Sergio looked between Elio and the books, clearly torn. Elio smiled at him, and God, that smile, even diminished by exhaustion and hardship, still had the power to make Claudia's heart stutter. "Go ahead, buddy. I'll be right here when you're done." Reluctantly, Sergio took Father Bennett's offered hand, looking back every few steps as they walked toward the shelter's small library corner. Claudia gestured toward a door marked storage. "Talk, now." The storage room smelled of industrial cleaner and cardboard. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with donations, winter coats, canned goods. Claudia crossed her arms, maintaining physical and emotional distance, while Elio stood near the door, hands shoved in his pockets like he didn't trust himself not to reach for her. "I wasn't a criminal," he started, words tumbling out rushed and desperate. "I know what you found. I know what it looked like. But Claudia, I swear to you, I was never—" "Then what were those documents?" She kept her voice level, lawyer mode, even as old hurt threatened to crack through. "Financial records with names I recognized from the news. Men connected to—" She stopped, adjusted her phrasing. "To terrible things. Money laundering. Connections to people who disappeared. I saw the evidence. Elio, you saw what I was compiling." He ran a hand through his too long hair, agitation clear in every movement. "My boss, Maxim Nikolai, he was running everything through our firm, Hartwell and Associates, legitimate investment banking on the surface, but underneath—" He laughed, bitter and broken. Underneath it was a pipeline for organized crime, money from illegal operations, assets from people who'd been hurt or worse, shell corporations hiding everything. Claudia's lawyer brain engaged automatically, sorting information. "You're saying you discovered this?" "I discovered it because I was supposed to help with it." Elio's voice dropped. "Maxim pulled me into his office one day, 8 months before you left. Told me I was being promoted, that I'd be handling special accounts for particular clients. He showed me enough that I understood exactly what he meant, and he made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. So you agreed." The accusation came out sharper than intended. I pretended to agree. Elio met her eyes, his gaze steady despite the pain there. "And then I started copying everything. Every file, every transaction, every name and number. I was building a case to take to the FBI. You expect me to believe. I contacted them 6 weeks before you found those documents." His voice cracked. "Special Agent Rebecca Flores, White-Collar Crime Division. I was working with federal investigators. Claudia, those papers you found? That was my insurance policy. Copies of everything I was handing over, hidden in my home office in case something happened to me." The room tilted slightly. Claudia grabbed the edge of a shelf to steady herself. "That's not you. Never said anything. Never told me what was happening. I was trying to protect you." Elio's composure finally shattered. Maxim Nikolai had people who'd crossed him eliminated, Claudia. Not arrested, not threatened. Gone. I couldn't risk telling you while I was still inside, while I was still gathering evidence. I thought I'd have time. Thought I'd bring the whole operation down and then explain everything and we'd— He stopped, swallowed hard. "And then you found the documents and left. I was 6 months pregnant and terrified." Old pain surfaced, sharp as the day she'd driven away with everything she owned stuffed in her sedan. "I thought I was protecting our baby from a father involved in—" "I know. God, Claudia, I know." Elio's hands came out of his pockets, reaching toward her before dropping. "I tried to find you. Called your phone 200 times that first week. Went to your sister's place, your mother's, every friend I could think of. But you disappeared completely. Because I was scared. And before I could track you down, the FBI moved me into protective custody." His voice went hollow. Maxim discovered someone was feeding information to federal investigators. He started eliminating anyone who might know. 4 people gone in 2 weeks. The FBI pulled me out in the middle of the night. Told me I was the only living witness left with enough evidence to bring down his entire operation. Claudia's mind raced. Lawyer instincts sorting truth from fabrication. His story was specific, detailed in ways that would be hard to invent. But 6 years of believing one narrative couldn't be rewritten in 5 minutes. Witness protection. 6 years. Elio's laugh was hollow. 6 years in various shelters, halfway houses, under different names, moving every few months for safety. No contact with anyone from my previous life. I begged Agent Flores to find you, to at least let you know I wasn't what you thought. She said no. Said if Maxim's people discovered I had a family, you'd become leverage. That keeping you safe meant staying dead to you. The trial keeps getting delayed. New evidence, new charges, legal maneuvering. It's scheduled for January now. Finally. His eyes held desperate hope. Once I testify, once Maxim and his people are convicted, the protection ends. I can have my life back. Or what's left of it. Silence stretched between them, heavy with 6 years of misunderstanding and loss. "I need proof," Claudia finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to verify what you're telling me. I can't just—" "I understand." Elio pulled a crumpled business card from his pocket. "Agent Rebecca Flores, FBI. She can confirm everything. Or don't call her. Investigate yourself. "You're a lawyer now," Father Bennett told me. "You'll know how to find the truth." Claudia took the card, their fingers brushing for one electric moment. "I don't know what to believe. Believe that I never stopped loving you." The words came out raw, unguarded. "Believe that every day for 6 years I wondered if we'd had a boy or girl. If you were okay. If you thought about me even a fraction as much as I thought about you. Believe that I—" The storage door opened. Sergio stood there, music box in one hand, Father Bennett behind him looking apologetic. "Sorry," he was insistent about checking on you both. But Claudia barely heard the priest. She was watching Sergio walk directly to Elio, reach up, and take his hand with complete, uncomplicated trust. Elio looked down at their joined hands, then at Claudia, and she saw him doing the math he'd started 3 days ago. 6 years since she left. Sergio clearly 6 years old. Those unmistakable features they shared. "That boy," Elio said quietly, his voice breaking on every word. "He's 6 years old. Claudia, is he mine?" Claudia didn't answer his question. She couldn't, not with Sergio standing there holding Elio's hand, not with 6 years of carefully constructed walls crumbling around her, not with her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack from the pressure. "We have to go." The words came out strangled, barely recognizable as her own voice. She reached for Sergio, gently extracting his small hand from Elio's larger one, ignoring the way her son's face fell in confusion. "Claudia, please, don't." She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the desperate hope in those eyes that had haunted her dreams for 6 years. Just don't. She walked out of Street Benedict's with Sergio clutching his repaired music box, the delicate melody playing on repeat as if mocking her with its sweetness. Behind them, she felt Elio's gaze like a physical weight, pressing against her shoulders, begging her to turn around. She didn't, but his question followed her home, echoed through her apartment, whispered in every corner. "Is he mine?" That night, after Sergio finally fell asleep with the music box on his nightstand, Claudia sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and a determination that bordered on obsession. If Elio was telling the truth, if even a fraction of his story held water, she needed to know. And if he was lying, if this was some elaborate manipulation, she needed to protect her son. Either way, the answer lived in documentation. Evidence. The kind of paper trail lawyers knew how to follow. She started with the basics. Federal court databases, public records, anything accessible with her legal credentials. The search for United States v. Nikolai returned results that made her breath catch. Case No. 19CR00847. United States District Court, Southern District of New York. United States of America v. Maxim Nikolai, et al. Sealed, protected witness testimony. Trial scheduled for January 17th, 3 weeks away. Her hands trembled as she clicked deeper, navigating through layers of restricted information, using the access her partnership at Castellano and Associates provided. Witness list. Partially redacted. But there, buried in a footnote about protective custody arrangements, a reference to witness E.L. Elio Lopez. She cross-referenced with other databases, pulled up news articles from 6 years ago about an FBI investigation into organized crime syndicates operating through legitimate financial institutions. Hartwell and Associates appeared in 3 different pieces, always described vaguely as cooperating with federal investigators. At 2 a.m, Claudia found herself staring at a subpoena dated 7 years ago before she'd left, before she'd found those documents compelling one Elio Lopez to provide testimony and documentation regarding financial irregularities at Hartwell and Associates. He'd been telling the truth. The realization hit like a freight train, stealing her breath and bringing tears she'd held back for 6 years. She'd run from an innocent man. She'd kept his son from him. She'd built her entire new life on a foundation of misunderstanding and fear. But she needed more. Needed certainty. Needed someone to confirm what these cold documents suggested. At 8:30 the next morning, Claudia called in every professional favor she had. By 10 o'clock, she was sitting across from Janet Okoye, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, in a federal building that smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucratic determination. Janet was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. Someone Claudia had worked opposite on a corporate fraud case 2 years ago. They'd developed a mutual professional respect that occasionally bordered on friendship. "This is highly irregular," Janet said, reviewing the confidentiality agreement Claudia had just signed. The Nikolai case is sensitive. Protected witness identities are sealed for a reason. I understand, but Elio Lopez is... Claudia paused, choosing her words carefully. Someone from my past. He's told me things about his involvement in this case, and I need to verify them before I make certain decisions. Janet studied her for a long moment. Decisions about what? About whether to trust him. About whether to let him into my son's life. Claudia met her gaze steadily. About whether the man I left 6 years ago was actually the hero he claims to be, or the criminal I believed him to be. Something shifted in Janet's expression. She pulled a thick file from her desk drawer, opened it, and began reading in that careful, measured tone prosecutors used when discussing classified information. Elio Lopez came to us 7 years ago, walked into the New York field office, and told Special Agent Rebecca Flores that his boss was running a criminal enterprise through Hartwell and Associates. Money laundering, assets from various illegal operations, shell corporations hiding everything. He said he was gathering evidence. For 8 months, he documented everything. Janet flipped through pages, her voice taking on something like admiration. Bank transfers, client lists, meeting notes, recordings. He wore a wire to conversations that would have gotten him disappeared if anyone had suspected. He copied files from Maxim Nikolai's private server, knowing that if he got caught, he wouldn't just be terminated, he'd be eliminated. Claudia's throat tightened. He never told me. He couldn't. Nikolai had already arranged for 12 people to have fatal accidents or simply vanish when they got too close to his operation. Janet looked up from the file. Your ex-husband knew the risks. Agent Flores told him repeatedly that he could walk away, that we'd find another way to build the case. He refused. Said he had a pregnant wife at home and wanted to build a world safe enough for his child. The words landed like physical blows. Claudia pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back the sob threatening to escape. He gave up everything, Janet continued quietly. His career, his identity, his entire life. When Nikolai discovered the leak, we still don't know how we had to extract Elio in the middle of the night. Witness protection. Complete isolation from his previous existence. We've never seen someone sacrifice so much for a case. Why didn't you tell me? Claudia's voice broke. I was his wife. I was carrying his child. Why didn't someone... We tried to find you. Janet's expression softened with genuine regret. But you'd disappeared completely. Changed your phone number. Moved without leaving a forwarding address. Cut contact with mutual friends. By the time we located you through your law school enrollment, actually, Agent Flores made the call that contacting you would put you at risk. If Nikolai's people discovered Elio had a family, you'd become leverage. So you let me believe he was a criminal. We let you stay safe. Janet closed the file. I know that's not what you want to hear. But Maxim Nikolai doesn't make threats, he makes examples. Elio understood that protecting you meant staying dead to you. It destroyed him. But he did it anyway. Claudia sat in silence, drowning in guilt and grief, and a growing certainty that she'd made the worst mistake of her life 6 years ago. The trial is in 3 weeks, Janet said gently. Elio's testimony is crucial. Without him, Nikolai walks. And if Nikolai walks, your ex-husband will spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. What can I do? Janet considered her carefully. Are you asking as his ex-wife or as an attorney? Both. Neither. I don't know. Claudia laughed, bitter and broken. I just know I owe him 6 years and I can't give those back, but maybe I can give him something now. We could use someone coordinating witness support, making sure he's prepared, that he understands the process, that he has legal representation for any complications that might arise. Janet tapped the file thoughtfully. Someone he trusts. Someone with a very personal investment in making sure he survives this. The weight of that responsibility settled over Claudia's shoulders. Terrifying. Necessary. Right. I'll do it, she said. Whatever he needs. That evening, Claudia returned to Street Benedict's alone. She'd left Sergio with her mother, claiming work obligations, unable to face her son's disappointed questions about why they weren't visiting the nice man. She found Elio in his usual corner, reading a battered paperback that looked like it had survived several lifetimes. Tom Clancy. She noticed with a pang he'd always loved thrillers. The more complex, the better. Some things hadn't changed. He looked up when her shadow fell across his table, and the naked vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her. You came back. I needed to talk to you. Really talk. Claudia sat down across from him without asking permission. Without Sergio, without interruptions. Okay. He closed the book carefully. giving her his complete attention in that focused way she remembered. "I'm listening. I spoke with Janet Okoye today, federal prosecutor on the Nikolai case." She watched his face, saw surprise flicker there. "She confirmed everything, the investigation, the evidence you gathered, the 8 months you spent risking your life. All of it." Elio's jaw tightened. "I wasn't lying to you. I know that now, and Her voice cracked. She forced herself to continue. "I'm so sorry, Elio. I should have given you a chance to explain. Should have trusted you enough to listen before I ran. You were protecting our baby." His hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching hers. "You did what any good mother would do when faced with evidence that her child's father might be dangerous. I've never blamed you for that, Claudia. Not for 1 second. You should. I blamed you for 6 years based on incomplete information and fear." Tears spilled over despite her efforts to maintain composure. "I kept your son from you. I let you spend 6 years in isolation thinking we didn't want you, didn't need you." "Stop." Elio's hand covered hers, warm and solid and achingly familiar. "We both made choices we thought would protect each other. I chose not to tell you about the investigation because I thought keeping you ignorant would keep you safe. You chose to leave because you thought keeping Sergio away from me would keep him safe. We were both wrong and both right, and both trying our best with impossible situations." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his, and felt something locked tight in her chest finally loosen. "Tell me about it. The last 6 years. I need to know what you went through." So he told her. About the loneliness of protective custody, moving every few months to different cities, different shelters, always under different names. About the fear that Nikolai's people would find him, that he'd become just another person who'd crossed the wrong man and paid the ultimate price. About the nights he almost gave up, almost contacted her despite the warnings, desperate just to know if she and their child were okay. "Father Bennett saved my life," Elio said quietly. "When I came here 3 months ago, I was drowning. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't see any future beyond the trial. He didn't ask questions, didn't push, just gave me space and books, and occasionally terrible coffee." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "He reminded me that survival was worth the effort. I'm glad you survived." Claudia squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you're here. Tell me about you. Law school, making partner. Father Bennett mentioned you're at Castellano and Associates." Pride colored his voice. "You always said you'd be a lawyer. I'm glad you made it happen." She told him about the grueling years of night school while pregnant, then with a newborn, then a toddler. About the paralegal jobs that paid the bills while she studied. About passing the bar on her 2nd attempt and crying in her car for an hour afterward. About Sergio's autism diagnosis at 3 and learning to be the advocate he needed. About making partner last year and finally feeling like she'd built something stable. "You did all that alone." Elio's voice was rough with emotion. "You raised our son, built a career, created a whole life. I'm in awe of you, Claudia. I always was. But now, I should have done it with you." The confession slipped out before she could stop it. Every milestone, every struggle, every moment, it should have been ours together. We can't get those years back. He brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity through her entire body. "But maybe we can build something new from here, if you'll let me. If you think..." Father Bennett's appearance cut him off. The priest's expression was grave. "Elio, there's a phone call for you. Your federal contact. She says it's urgent." Elio's face went pale. He released Claudia's hand reluctantly and followed Father Bennett to the shelter's small office. Claudia waited, her stomach churning with undefined dread. When he returned 5 minutes later, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. His hands were shaking. "What happened?" Claudia stood, reaching for him instinctively. "The trial's been moved up, from January 17th to January 3rd. His voice was hollow. 2 weeks. Agent Flores says Nikolai's lawyers are pushing for a speedy trial, probably hoping we're not fully prepared. That's barely any time. And there's more." Elio met her eyes, fear naked in his expression. "There's been chatter. Nikolai's people have been asking questions about recent visitors to various shelters around the city. They're looking for me, Claudia. And they might be getting close." The bottom dropped out of her world. "If Nikolai's organization found Elio before the trial, if they eliminated their only living witness, I'm going to represent you." The words came out before she'd fully formed the thought, but once said, she knew they were right. Officially. As your attorney, I can access all the case files, coordinate with the prosecutors, make sure you have every protection available. You don't have to face this alone anymore. Claudia, if they're watching, if they connect you to me, then they connect me to you. She grabbed his hands, held them tight. I'm not running again, Elio. Not from you, not from this. 6 years ago I made a choice based on fear. This time I'm choosing courage. This time I'm choosing us. The hope that bloomed across his face was beautiful and heartbreaking. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, burying her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of cheap shelter soap and something underneath that was purely him, unchanged despite everything. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. Thank you for believing me, for coming back. Don't thank me yet. She pulled back enough to look at him. We have 2 weeks to prepare you for testimony that will either put Maxim Nikolai away for life or get you. She couldn't finish the sentence. I know the stakes. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I've always known them, but having you beside me makes them feel survivable. She left the shelter an hour later with a briefcase full of case files Janet had couriered over. A renewed sense of purpose and a feeling of rightness she hadn't experienced in 6 years. She was so focused on the documents, on mentally cataloging everything she needed to do in the next 2 weeks, that she didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street, didn't see the man in the driver's seat lower his camera after taking a series of photographs, didn't hear him make a phone call in a language she wouldn't have recognized anyway. She just climbed into her car and drove home to her son, unaware that she'd just become visible to the very people Elio had spent 6 years hiding from. Unaware that the danger she'd thought she was escaping 6 years ago was now circling both of them, patient and predatory, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Claudia had forgotten what it felt like to be consumed by something other than survival. For 6 years her life had been a carefully orchestrated routine. Work, Sergio, sleep, repeat. Safe, predictable, lonely in ways she'd trained herself not to acknowledge. But now, with case files spread across her dining room table at 2 a.m. and her phone lighting up with messages from federal prosecutors, she felt alive in a way that terrified and exhilarated her. She threw herself into Elio's case with the intensity she normally reserved for partnership track litigation. Federal witness protection protocols, security assessments, testimony preparation strategies. She absorbed it all, making notes in the margins, identifying weaknesses, building contingency plans for scenarios she prayed would never materialize. Janet Okoye became her reluctant ally, providing access to sealed documents and confidential briefings with the kind of professional courtesy that suggested she understood this was about more than just legal representation. You're falling for him again, Janet observed during one of their coordination meetings, her tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. I never stopped, Claudia admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. I just buried it under fear and self-preservation. Turns out 6 years isn't long enough to kill love when it was real to begin with. Janet smiled, something warm and almost maternal. Then let's make sure he survives long enough for you two to figure out what comes next. Claudia visited the shelter daily, arriving with her leather briefcase and professional demeanor, leaving hours later with her carefully constructed walls in pieces. They'd start with case preparation, reviewing timeline inconsistencies in Maxim's financial records, rehearsing cross-examination strategies, discussing the prosecution's approach, but inevitably, their conversations would drift. Do you remember our first date? Elio asked one afternoon, a rare smile breaking through the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched into his features. They were sitting in the shelter's small courtyard, winter sun providing more light than warmth. You insisted on splitting the check, and I was so flustered I nearly knocked over the waiter. Claudia laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she'd laughed about something other than Sergio's innocent observations? You were trying so hard to be chivalrous. I was trying so hard to prove I didn't need rescuing. You never did need rescuing. That's what I loved about you. His voice softened. You were this force of nature, so determined to conquer the world on your own terms. I just wanted to be allowed to stand beside you while you did it. Past tense? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Present. Always present. Elio's hand found hers on the bench between them. Even when I thought I'd never see you again, I loved you in present tense. Loved. Love. Will love. It's all the same when it comes to you. She should pull away. Should maintain professional boundaries. Remember why she'd left. protect herself from the vulnerability threatening to overwhelm her. Instead, she laced her fingers through his and held on. But Sergio's constant questions made maintaining any emotional distance impossible. Every morning, her son would ask about Mr. Ellis, with an insistence that bordered on obsession. Every evening, he'd recount memories of their brief interactions with the kind of detail he usually reserved for his special interests trains, specifically the mechanical workings of diesel engines, a fascination that had started at age 4 and never wavered. "Mr. Ellis fix," Sergio would say, holding up whatever object had captured his attention. "Mr. Ellis, nice hands, like papa hands should be." That last observation had stopped Claudia cold. Sergio had no memory of his father. Elio had been erased from their lives before Sergio's first conscious memories formed. Yet somehow, some instinct deeper than memory recognized what was missing. On day 5 of her daily shelter visits, Claudia made a decision that terrified her. She brought Sergio with her. Father Bennett had cleared a small room off the main hall, giving them privacy while remaining close enough for safety. Claudia watched Sergio's face transform when he spotted Elio, that radiant smile that appeared so rarely lighting up his features. "Mr. Ellis." He ran forward with uncharacteristic abandon, throwing himself into Elio's arms. Elio caught him easily, his expression a complicated mix of joy and pain that made Claudia's chest ache. "Hey, buddy. I'm glad to see you too." "Build?" Sergio held up a small bag of wooden blocks he'd insisted on bringing. "You teach?" "Absolutely." Elio settled cross-legged on the floor with Sergio, and Claudia watched something shift in both of them. Sergio, who struggled with eye contact and found most social interactions overwhelming, looked directly at Elio as they built. Elio, who'd seemed diminished by 6 years of hiding, straightened with purpose. "See, if you balance this piece here," Elio demonstrated with patient precision. "The whole structure stays stable even when you add weight on top." Sergio mimicked the movement, his small hands trembling slightly with the effort of fine motor control. When the block settled perfectly into place, his whole face illuminated. "I did. Stable. You did. You're a natural builder." Elio's voice was thick with emotion. "Just like your—" He stopped, glanced at Claudia with a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, giving permission for something she wasn't ready to name yet. "Just like people who think about how things work," Elio finished smoothly. "Engineers. Architects. People who see the world in structures and connections." They spent an hour building towers, bridges, elaborate geometric patterns that Sergio explained with increasing vocabulary and decreasing hesitation. Claudia noticed what she'd been denying for days. Around Elio, Sergio's communication blossomed. The words came easier. The anxiety that usually shadowed social interaction evaporated, replaced by a confidence that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Or not from nowhere. From having found something he'd been missing without knowing he was searching for it. "He's incredible," Elio said that evening after Sergio had fallen asleep on a cot Father Bennett had set up. Exhausted from the excitement of extended social interaction, they stood watching him sleep, this child who was undeniably both of theirs. "You've done an amazing job raising him, Claudia. He's kind and curious and so wonderfully himself. You gave him that." "We," Claudia corrected softly, the word feeling like a leap off a cliff. "We did. He has your focus, your gentle hands, your way of seeing patterns in chaos. I just wish you'd known him from the beginning." The admission hung between them, heavy with 6 years of loss. Elio reached for her hand, and this time she didn't just allow it. She turned toward him, closing the distance that had felt insurmountable weeks ago. "We can't get that time back, but maybe we can build something from here." She looked up at him, seeing past the exhaustion and fear to the man she'd married in that tiny courthouse ceremony, both of them too young and too certain that love would be enough. "If we survive the next 2 weeks. When," Elio corrected, his free hand coming up to cup her face. "When we survive. I've spent 6 years staying alive for the possibility of justice. Now I'm staying alive for the certainty of you and our son." She kissed him then, unable to resist the pull any longer. It was gentle and desperate simultaneously, tasting of tears and coffee, and something that felt like coming home after a long, painful exile. But coming home meant bringing danger to the doorstep. Claudia had noticed the cars first, a gray Honda Civic that appeared near her apartment 3 days in a row, parked in different spots but always with a view of her building's entrance. Then a black sedan near Sergio's school, idling too long in the pickup zone. Her investigator instincts, honed through years of litigation and cross-examination, screamed warnings she couldn't ignore. She'd contacted Janet immediately, keeping her voice level, even as panic threatened to choke her. "I think I'm being followed." End quote. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds too long. "Describe the vehicles." Claudia did, providing license plate numbers she'd memorized automatically, descriptions of the drivers she'd glimpsed through tinted windows. "We've picked up chatter on the wiretaps," Janet finally admitted. "Maxim knows someone has been visiting Elio regularly. They're trying to identify you, connect you to him. Claudia, you need to pull back. Stop visiting the shelter. Let us move Elio to a secure federal facility." "No." Elio's voice was firm when she relayed Janet's recommendation that evening. They were in the courtyard again, speaking in low tones while Sergio played with his blocks under Father Bennett's watchful supervision inside. "Moving now, 2 weeks before trial, gives Maxim's lawyers ammunition. They'll claim I'm unstable, unreliable, that my testimony is compromised by security theater. I've seen it happen in other cases. They're looking for you through me." Claudia grabbed his hands, fear making her voice sharp. "If they identify me, if they connect me to Sergio, then we protect Sergio. You take him somewhere safe, stay with your mother or a hotel and leave you here alone?" She laughed, bitter and broken. "I just got you back, Elio. I'm not walking away again. Even if staying puts you in danger, especially then." She pressed her forehead to his, breathing him in, drawing strength from his presence. "We face this together or not at all." That night, with Sergio asleep and the shelter quiet around them, Claudia made the confession she'd been avoiding since the moment she'd confirmed Elio's story. They sat on the floor beside Sergio's cot, backs against the wall, shoulders touching in the darkness. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. "Something I should have said days ago." Elio waited, patient as always, giving her space to find the words. "Yes," Claudia said finally, the single syllable carrying 6 years of weight. "He's yours. Sergio is your son." She felt Elio's entire body go rigid beside her. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't respond. Then his shoulders began to shake. He was crying silently, desperately, the kind of grief that comes from loss so profound it lives in your bones. Claudia turned toward him, pulling him into her arms, and he buried his face against her shoulder while 6 years of missing his child's life poured out in shuddering sobs. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into his hair, her own tears falling freely. "I'm so sorry. You missed his first word, his first steps, his first day of school. I'm sorry I kept him from you. I'm sorry. Don't." Elio pulled back enough to look at her, his face wet and devastated and somehow hopeful. "Don't apologize for protecting our son. You did what you had to do, but Claudia," his voice cracked, "thank you for telling me. Thank you for letting me know him now. Thank you for giving me a chance to be his father, even if I missed the beginning." She kissed him again, tasting salt and redemption, feeling something locked tight in her chest finally release. This was right. Terrifying and complicated and dangerous, but right. They stayed like that, wrapped around each other beside their sleeping son, rebuilding something they'd thought was lost forever. The moment shattered when Father Bennett burst through the door, his normally calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled alarm. "Elio, Claudia." Someone broke into the shelter's administrative office. They went through the resident files. Claudia was on her feet instantly, lawyer mode engaging even as fear flooded her system. "When?" Must have been during evening service. "I was leading prayer. Most of the staff was helping with dinner. They jimmied the lock on the file cabinet, photographed everything." Father Bennett's hands shook slightly. "The police are on their way, but they know he's here." Claudia's mind raced through implications and responses, searching for options that wouldn't end in catastrophe. "They know his alias, his location. We need to move him now. And compromise the trial," Elio finished grimly. He was standing now too, positioning himself between Sergio's sleeping form and the door on pure instinct. Exactly what Maxim wants. Claudia's phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. Her hands trembled as she opened the message. A photograph loaded slowly, pixels assembling into a nightmare. Sergio, standing outside his school, his distinctive green backpack visible, his face captured in perfect focus. Below the image, 3 words in cold, clinical text. "Pretty boy. Vulnerable." The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering against the floor. They'd found them. Not just Elio, all of them. and they were sending a message that transcended language and legal jurisdiction. We know where your son goes to school. We know how to hurt you, and we will, unless you disappear. Elio picked up the phone, read the message, and went completely still. When he looked at Claudia, his eyes held the same desperate calculation she felt tearing through her own mind. Protect the case or protect their child. Justice or safety. The impossible choice that had no right answer. We need to call Janet, Claudia heard herself say, her voice coming from somewhere far away. We need federal protection for Sergio. We need... Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time just text. Withdraw. Disappear. Or we make sure the boy's disability becomes permanent. The threat was specific, calculated, designed to exploit the one thing they both loved more than justice, more than vengeance, more than anything in this world. Claudia looked at Elio. Elio looked at their sleeping son. And the walls they'd spent 2 weeks carefully dismantling between them crashed down under the weight of a danger neither of them could fight alone. Terror had a way of crystallizing everything into brutal clarity. Claudia stared at that photograph of Sergio, her beautiful, vulnerable boy captured without his knowledge or consent, and felt something shift inside her. Not surrender. Not fear, though that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. No. What replaced the paralysis was something harder, sharper, forged from 6 years of raising a child alone and learning that mothers didn't have the luxury of breaking down when their children needed them to be steel. Call Janet, she said, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. Now. We're not running, and we're not backing down, but we are protecting our son with every resource the federal government has. And then we're putting Maxim Nikolai so far behind bars he'll never threaten another family again. Elio was already dialing, his hands steady despite the fear she could read in every line of his body. Within minutes, Janet Okoye's voice came through the speaker, sharp and focused. I'm sending a protection detail to your location immediately. Don't move. Don't leave. Don't. My son, Claudia interrupted, surprised by how calm she sounded. He's at my apartment with my mother. They need protection right now. Already dispatched. We've had contingency protocols in place since you started visiting Elio regularly. Janet's tone gentled slightly. Claudia, I know this is terrifying, but this is what we do. Sergio will be safe. I promise you that. Within 2 hours, their world had been reorganized with the brutal efficiency of federal crisis response. Sergio, still sleepy and confused, was bundled into an unmarked SUV with Claudia's mother Rosa, who held him close and murmured reassurances in Italian, while agents explained they were going on an adventure to a special safe house upstate. Sergio, bless his adaptable spirit, had simply asked if Mr. Ellis would be there too. Soon, baby, Claudia had promised, kissing his forehead with desperate intensity. Papa will see you very soon. The word had slipped out without planning, without thought, but it felt right. Sergio had smiled, repeated Papa, like he was testing the shape of it, and waved goodbye as the SUV pulled away into the pre-dawn darkness. Elio was moved to a secure federal facility in Lower Manhattan, 12 floors of reinforced concrete and armed guards where witnesses were protected until trial. Claudia was granted access as his attorney of record, which meant she became his only connection to the outside world beyond his federal handlers. She visited him every day, arriving with legal briefs and leaving with her heart in pieces, and then carefully reassembled. They prepared for trial, with the intensity of people who understood that failure meant more than professional disappointment. It meant Elio would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, and their family would never be safe. Walk me through the Cayman accounts again, Claudia would say, spreading financial documents across the secure conference room table. The defense will try to claim you had access to these funds, that your cooperation was motivated by personal gain rather than conscience. Elio would explain patiently, for the 3rd or 5th or 10th time, exactly how Maxim's money laundering operation had worked, his voice steady even when discussing transactions that had funded terrible things. His memory was photographic, his attention to detail devastating, and Claudia watched the federal prosecutor's confidence grow with every preparation session. But in the quiet moments between legal strategy, they'd talk about other things. About Sergio's progress in the safe house, Rosa sent videos daily, showing him building elaborate structures with Elio's patient teaching still evident in every careful placement. About the life they might build after this was over, if they survived. About forgiveness and second chances and whether love could be rebuilt from fragments. I never stopped being your husband, Elio said one evening, 10 days before trial. Not legally, anyway. You filed for divorce, but I never signed the papers. They're still sitting in a federal evidence locker somewhere, part of the timeline of when I went into protection. Claudia looked up sharply from the witness prep notes she'd been reviewing. You're saying we're still married? Technically. He smiled, tentative and hopeful. If you want to be, if you think we can, I think we can try. She reached across the table, laced her fingers through his. After the trial, after we're safe, I think we can try to build something real from all this wreckage. The trial of United States v. Maxim Nikolai began on January 3rd in a federal courtroom packed with media, law enforcement, and spectators drawn by the sensational nature of the charges. Claudia sat in the gallery every single day, her presence a silent promise that Elio wouldn't face this alone. The prosecution built their case with methodical precision, laying out years of criminal enterprise hidden behind Hartwell and Associates' legitimate facade. Financial experts testified about money laundering schemes. Federal agents described investigations into disappearances and suspicious demises connected to Maxim's organization. Former employees, granted immunity, admitted to their roles in facilitating illegal operations. But everyone knew the trial's center of gravity was Elio's testimony. He took the stand on day 4, dressed in a suit Janet's office had provided, looking more like the man Claudia had married and less like the hollowed-out stranger she'd found in that shelter. His voice was steady as he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. For 2 days, he detailed everything. The moment Maxim had recruited him into the criminal operation under the guise of a promotion, the 8 months he'd spent documenting every transaction, every conversation, every piece of evidence while pretending compliance. The recordings he'd made, wearing a wire to meetings where people discussed acts that would haunt Claudia's nightmares. The night federal agents had extracted him, minutes before Maxim's people came looking. Maxim's defense team was vicious. They painted Elio as a disgruntled employee who'd fabricated evidence for revenge. They questioned his memory, his motives, his character. They suggested he'd been skimming funds himself and had turned informant only when caught. But Elio had documentation for everything. Bank records that corroborated his testimony. Recordings that captured Maxim's voice ordering acts of violence in coded language. Forensic evidence that confirmed every detail of his account. The defense's attacks shattered against the fortress of proof he'd spent 8 months building. On the 6th day of testimony, during the redirect examination, the prosecutor asked the question that cut through all the legal maneuvering. Mr. Lopez, you risked your life for this investigation. You gave up your career, your identity, 6 years of freedom. Why? The courtroom went silent. Elio looked directly at Claudia, and she saw everything they'd been through reflected in his eyes. The love, the loss, the impossible choices. The hope that maybe, finally, they could build something lasting. Because I wanted to be someone my son could be proud of, he said quietly. Someone who stood up when it mattered. Someone who chose what was right over what was safe. I wanted him to grow up in a world where people like Maxim Nikolai answer for what they've done. And I wanted to be the kind of father who made that world possible. The courtroom held its breath. Several jurors were visibly emotional. Claudia pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears that would wait for privacy. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Claudia spent those 6 hours in a small witness room with Janet, unable to eat, unable to think about anything except the 12 strangers deciding whether everything they'd sacrificed had been worth it. Elio was sequestered separately, federal protocol keeping him isolated even now. When the bailiff finally called them back, Claudia's hands were shaking so badly she could barely stand. The jury foreman was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a steady voice. In the matter of United States v. Maxim Nikolai, on the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering, guilty. On the charges of conspiracy to commit acts of violence resulting in demise, guilty. On all 47 counts, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Maxim's face remained impassive. But Claudia saw the moment he understood. His empire was finished. His freedom was gone. His ability to hurt people was ending. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole. 12 other members of his organization received sentences ranging from 15 years to life. The criminal network that had terrorized people for decades crumbled in a single morning. It was over. Elio was released from federal custody that afternoon. Witness protection was officially terminated. He walked out of the building into January sunshine, and Claudia was waiting on the courthouse steps. They stood there, 2 people who'd loved and lost and found each other again through impossible circumstances. and the weight of 6 years hung between them like a question neither knew how to answer. "I don't expect you to just pick up where we left off," Elio said carefully. "I know I'm a stranger to Sergio in many ways, and to you, after everything, you're not a stranger." Claudia closed the distance between them, took his hands in hers. "You're Sergio's father. You're the man who risked everything for justice. You're the person I never stopped loving, even when I desperately wanted to. You're my husband, apparently, since you never signed the divorce papers." He laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "Is that, do you want to stay married? I want to try. I want to build something real with you, with Sergio. I want family therapy and awkward conversations and learning how to be together again. I want messy and complicated and honest. I want us. Even after everything? Because of everything." She kissed him there on the courthouse steps, witnesses and cameras be damned. "We survived the worst. Now let's see if we can build something from the best parts we have left." They started slowly, carefully, like people learning to walk after a long illness. Family therapy sessions where they unpacked trauma and forgiveness and realistic expectations. Supervised visits where Elio learned Sergio's routines, the specific way he needed his sandwiches cut, the precise bedtime ritual that soothed his anxiety, the topics that fascinated him and the sounds that overwhelmed him. Sergio, in his simple wisdom, seemed to understand on some instinctive level that this was his father. He'd started calling Elio Papa that first week, the word emerging naturally during a building session, and both adults had cried while Sergio continued stacking blocks, unconcerned with the emotional devastation he'd just caused. "Papa good," Sergio had observed, patting Elio's knee. "Papa stays." "Papa stays," Elio had confirmed, his voice wrecked. "I'm never leaving you again, buddy. I promise." Months passed. The media attention faded as new scandals captured public interest. Maxim's criminal empire was dismantled piece by piece, assets seized, victims compensated where possible, and 3 people built something new from the wreckage of their old lives. They made the decision to relocate together. New York held too many painful memories, too many reminders of what they'd lost. They chose a small coastal town in Oregon, far from everything they'd known, where Sergio could attend an excellent special education program, and Claudia could open a practice focusing on family law. Elio found work as a financial consultant for nonprofit organizations, using his expertise to help rather than hide, building something good from skills that had once documented evil. Sergio thrived in ways that stunned and delighted them both. With his father's consistent presence, his communication exploded, not just words, though those came more easily, but confidence, willingness to try new things, joy in social interaction that had once terrified him. Elio taught him to fix things, to build things, to see the world as problems waiting for patient solutions. Claudia taught him to advocate for himself, to understand that his differences were strengths, to take up space in the world with pride. 1 year after the trial, on Christmas Eve, they made a pilgrimage back to New York, back to Street Benedict's homeless shelter where everything had begun and nearly ended. Father Bennett met them at the door, his weathered face creasing into a smile that held genuine joy. "My favorite family. Welcome home." "We brought donations," Claudia said, gesturing to the bags they carried. "Toys, books, warm clothes. It seemed right. Full circle," Father Bennett observed, embracing each of them. "From crisis to healing, back to giving. That's how grace works." Sergio, now 7.5, and so much more confident than the 6-year-old who'd first walked through these doors, took his role seriously. He handed out toys with both parents beside him, explaining carefully to each person what made each gift special. When a little girl with eyes too old for her young face accepted a stuffed bear, Sergio signed to her in the ASL he'd been learning. "You're not alone." The girl's face transformed. She signed back, "Thank you." Claudia watched this interaction, her son connecting with another child through patience and kindness, offering comfort he'd once needed desperately himself, and felt something settle in her chest. They'd come so far. Through fear and loss and impossible choices, they'd somehow found their way to this moment. A family, whole and healing, giving back to the community that had sheltered them when they needed it most. That night, in the hotel room they'd booked for their New York visit, Claudia watched Elio read to Sergio before bed. It was a routine they'd established months ago, Elio's gentle voice working through whatever book Sergio had chosen. Tonight, something about dinosaurs and time travel. Sergio's eyes grew heavy, his body relaxed against his father's chest, completely safe and completely loved. Elio caught her watching and smiled that smile she'd fallen in love with a decade ago. That smile she'd found again in a homeless shelter. That smile that promised tomorrow and hope and family. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. For what? For believing him when the evidence suggested she shouldn't? For giving him his son after 6 years of separation? For loving him despite every reason fear provided to run? For coming back, he whispered later, when Sergio was asleep in the adjoining room and they were alone in the darkness. For being brave enough to come back to me, to us, to this impossible, beautiful mess we're building. "We both came back," Claudia said, taking his hand, interweaving their fingers like they were building something permanent from temporary connection. "That's what matters. We both chose this, chose each other, chose to believe that broken things can be repaired if you're patient enough." Outside their window, snow began to fall on New York City, covering everything in temporary perfection. Inside, a family broken and healed and whole again was finally, impossibly home. Elio pulled her closer, and she went willingly, settling into the space beside him that had been empty for 6 years but felt like it had been waiting all along. Tomorrow they'd fly back to Oregon, back to their new life. Tomorrow they'd continue building their future one careful day at a time. But tonight, they were here, where it had all started and nearly ended, where fear had given way to courage, where loss had transformed into love, where 3 people had found each other against impossible odds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments of struggle and triumph. But tonight, wrapped in each other's arms while their son slept peacefully in the next room, Claudia and Elio simply existed in the present, grateful, hopeful, and finally free. The future they'd thought was lost forever was just beginning, and it was more beautiful than either of them had dared to imagine. This holiday season, remember the families finding hope in homeless shelters across the world, people like Elio, who are rebuilding their lives one day at a time. If this story touched your heart, please kindly like, share, and subscribe to spread awareness about the homeless during this season of giving. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who need reminders. Wishing you a blessed holiday season filled with warmth, connection, and the courage to always be kind. Thank you.